am 66 years old and my name is Margot Hayes. I am about to tell you something that has to do with a real-life experience I had. There is nothing about it that is wrong or made up in any way. I keep thinking about how it happened since it has had a lasting effect on the direction my life is going to go. The day my husband Ernest died was the quietest day of my life. On the other hand, it was full of an incredible amount of noise. I had been thinking that the weight and density of the air were making it hard for me to breathe properly. The dread and sorrow I was feeling were so strong that I felt like I was suffocating. It seemed like I couldn't breathe. It felt like the real world around me didn't exist. It didn't seem to be there at all. That day, the person I love more than anything else in the world beat me. Nevertheless, there were other things that happened that day that are much worse. That was added later on. While I stood near where he was buried, I couldn't help but look down at the box that held his remains. After a while, I heard a strange buzzing sound that seemed to be coming from someplace inside my pocket. My phone was hitting my body, which disrupted a moment I thought would never be marred in any way. I wasn't ready for any kind of phone call, and I didn't even think about the fact that someone would be calling me. I never believed this would happen for a second. Who do you think would be calling me at this time of day? I saw that there was a message from a number I didn't know while I was gazing down at my phone. When I saw the words, I felt my heart racing in my chest like a bird fluttering for a short while. As soon as I saw the letter, I felt like a cold chill was moving through my body. Even though the message was clear and to the point, this happened. When I read the words, "I'm alive," everything in my life stopped right then and there. At that moment, I felt like I could leave behind the fact that Ernest was dead, the casket in front of me, and the frigid ground. I used my sharp eyes to look at the phrases again. My lungs are taking in oxygen and letting out carbon dioxide at the same time. Who are you? I inquired right away when I started to think of an answer. First of all, it was crazy to even think about asking this question. I started to shake from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. The answer that came almost right away was, "They are watching us. Our sons are not to be trusted. I can't give you any information." Those words hit me in the stomach like a punch. I was very overwhelmed by the feeling of my breath getting stuck in my throat. It was a very strong feeling for me. My boys. Could Charles and Henry really be who they say they are? What conclusions may we draw from this information? I couldn't focus on anything at all. I couldn't say anything because I didn't know what to say in response to what I had just heard. Things were already going wrong in my life because of Ernest's death, and now they were getting considerably worse. Where may someone get this information? Is it really possible for just one person to pass on a message like that, given all the information they have on my kids? There is also no way they could have explained why they handed it to me at a time and place that are so close to my spouse or wife's burial. The message was far more intricate than that. It was not simple in any sense. They utilized it to stop anything from happening. I had never seen this warning before, and I didn't know how to understand what it was trying to say. I saw Henry and Charles right away when I looked up. They were standing on the edge of the burial mound. I felt like they didn't care at all when they walked away from me. Even though they acted calm and collected, the way they acted made the mood very different from the one created by the other members of the organization. "I am leaving right now." They said what they felt in a way that didn't show any signs of bias, and their body language didn't show any signs of being open to change. This feeling was not at all like grieving. It was a feeling that was far different from that. I made a conscious effort to see my sons as the individuals they really are when I looked at them. I tried to see past the tiny boys I raised with all my heart. I was just starting to feel the cold at that particular moment. Since Charles was born, his will to succeed has been stronger than his brother's desire to do the same. He had always thought he deserved a better life than the one he was experiencing. He had always wanted to do better and leave behind the world that Ernest and I had worked so hard to build. Henry was the kind of person who never did anything on his own and always did what other people did. Because of this, he ended up studying the same subject as his brother Charles. He learned all of the lessons and attitudes that were taught to him while he was on board, and they became a part of his own way of thinking. He gave gifts to Charles and others. At one point along the trip, each and every one of them changed. I learned that I couldn't fathom how they changed into whatever they were. Ernest was a friend of mine who kept me safe and who I never wanted to say goodbye to for 42 years. He was the only thing that made me feel like I didn't belong. I didn't see him for the first time until I was 24 years old. People in the small community of Spring Creek went about their everyday lives in a sedate and steady way. Love was the only thing that mattered in that area. Nothing else was as significant. Ernest and I both grew up in places where money was tight. We didn't own any physical things, but we had each other, and that was enough for us. Ernest was hired to do housework so that he could pay for his mother's medical care. She was sick at the time. My dad owned and ran the bike shop where I worked as a mechanic who worked on bikes. Even though we didn't have a lot of money, we were happy with how things turned out. His hands were always slick with oil, yet his smile was so bright that it might be argued that it was the most beautiful thing in the universe. I can still recall the first time he ever said a word to me quite clearly. I was going to the market one morning. It was Tuesday, and I was wearing a green dress that was starting to fade. Also, my sneakers were in bad shape. He took sure to wash his hands right away after leaving his store because they were covered in oil. When he came up to me, the smile on his face was so humble that it made my heart race. He spoke to me in a quiet voice. "Margot, good morning. Isn't this a beautiful morning? Even though I don't have a bike, I couldn't help but want to see yours." Since I found out why I was visiting him, he and I have been inseparable. They went for walks in the park, had passionate nights under the old oak tree, promised to love each other forever, and finally got married in a simple ceremony. After they talked, this is what happened. Even though life wasn't always easy for us, we were able to make it work anyhow. We had to live with it. I sewed together pieces of garments that had been embroidered for the women who lived in the town. During this time, Ernest was only interested in his store. He would get up at dawn and labor until dusk, taking no breaks for several hours in a row. Even though we didn't have a lot of things, we were surrounded by love. I was sure that my heart would explode because I was so happy when I found out that Charles was coming into the world. His dad had huge eyes and a beautiful smile, just like mine. Henry was exactly as perfect as his siblings and sisters, and he showed up 2 years after they did. I put all of my love into raising my kids and tried everything I could to make sure they had a better life than I did. Ernest was a great dad who often took the boys fishing, read them stories before bed, and showed them how to fix things. I gave them everything they needed, from clothes to comforts, no matter what it was. I have always believed strongly that the people in our family are tied in a way that would be very hard to break. They also began to change after a while. Charles tends to distrust everything since he wants to do amazing things with his life. He looked at the world with this purpose in mind. How could we ever hope to pay the rent on an apartment that is much smaller than the one we presently live in? Why didn't the other families in our neighborhood have cars that were the same make and model as ours? Henry was the little brother who usually followed his older brother around. He was someone who tried to be like his brother by copying what he did and doing the same things he did in the past. As soon as Ernest turned 18, he was able to start working at the store. In the end, he decided not to accept the offer that had been made to him. "Father, I'm very happy to tell you that I don't want to get my hands dirty like you do." The words had such a strong effect on Ernest that they caused him a lot of anguish. Even though he never said anything, I could see the sadness in his eyes. This is because I thought that one day I would grow up and become an important person in society. In the nights, I would see him on the porch, looking up at the sky and letting his thoughts drift away. I didn't think about how much pain he was in, but when I saw how sad he was, my heart broke. Charles was able to create a strong career in the city after working there for a few years. I have to say that I was very startled when Henry told me he was going to work in real estate. It was a revelation to him that this is the best career path for him. He was able to get a job in the firm in a short amount of time. They began to make a lot of money. Before that, I had never seen that many of them, and neither had Ernest. There were a lot more than that. I had a tremendous sense of satisfaction right away as I started. My sons were living lifestyles of luxury that we never believed we could afford for ourselves. Taking all of that into account, The feeling of pride soon turned into sadness as time went on. They cut back on the time they spent on the phone and the number of times they went out, going out less often than they used to. When they eventually got to the scene of the disaster, they made an entrance with their spectacular display of wealth and elegance that left a lasting impression on everyone who saw it. They drove expensive cars and wore trendy clothes. As soon as they got there, they started talking about investments and homes right away. It was as if they had entirely forgotten that we were part of their family. To them, we were just a reminder of how things used to be. "Mother," Charles remarked on one of his visits, "you and Father ought to relocate to a better place. This house is falling apart," he said, and he was correct. Although our house was small, it was ours, and it contained every memory of our life together. "Margot," Ernest was of the opinion that happiness was not something that could be purchased with money. "We have each other, and that's enough," I used to say. However, I began to question the truth of this statement at some point in time. Henry and Charles had both undergone a transformation. They had distanced themselves from me, and I was not sure how to get them back. I was no longer able to get in contact with them. It seemed like I was talking to a wall because nothing I said seemed to register. While their lives had progressed, ours had remained exactly the same as before. It was not until they started recommending that we sell the property and move to a retirement community that I began to recognize how far apart our perspectives had actually diverged. It was Jasmine, Charles's wife, who was the first to bring up the idea. "There are some lovely places for people of your age," she added. "You would be much more comfortable at a retirement community." This is what they believed we needed after all of those years of dedication, love, and sacrifice. I put up a fight, but I could see the way that they stared at us and the way that they talked about us. They had become completely indifferent to the situation. In their eyes, we were nothing more than a responsibility. Ernest, who was always the most level-headed, had stated, "Margot, money has transformed our sons." I said that I don't want to recognize that this is true from my point of view. As far as they are concerned, they have made the decision that we are no longer competent enough, is what I remember them saying. I kept telling myself that kids would learn to act differently as time went on. They would remember how we reared them, but they would also remember who they were. This is in addition to keeping memories of how we raised them. I felt deep down in my bones that Ernest was arguing for the most morally responsible side of the dispute. It has been a long time since I lost him. We had already lost them a long time before that. Before that moment, I had no idea how many fake things they had done. I had a gut sensation that something wasn't right away. Charles and Henry had changed so much that I was starting to feel like I was losing touch with the people I had known so well in the past. The folks whose upbringing I've spent a lot of time and effort on have changed so much that I can't recognize them anymore. None of the people knew any of the other people that were there before. People who seem to have forgotten about everything that matters to us because they are so focused on their accomplishments and the money they make. Ernest is someone I know I can count on when things become tough. They had always told me that things would get better soon as long as we did our best for them. At that time in my life, I was starting to get a little skeptical about this subject. I have never felt so alone and trapped as I do right now. The relationship we had was slowly becoming less close over the next few months, even though I tried hard to ignore this idea. I put my whole heart into my needlework and enjoyed the peaceful existence Ernest and I had formed together in the home we had constructed together. I worked in the garden for several hours without stopping. I was sure that everything in the house was fine while I was busy with different gardening duties, like getting rid of weeds and planting flowers. It gave me the opportunity to think about things in a way that kept them from being too much of a burden. I tried everything I could think of to get rid of the bad feeling that had settled in my chest and showed no indications of going away, but I couldn't. The idea that something more sneaky was going on behind the scenes was growing more and more worrisome to me. I saw that Charles would often make himself grin a few times, and his eyes always seemed odd when he talked to me. Also, it looked like he didn't want to spend any time with us at all. Even though he showed some signs of emotional separation, I couldn't figure out what might have caused it. Ernest was starting to realize that our boys had also gone through a change. After talking to Charles on the phone, Ernest said to Margot, "I have the feeling that they have no further interest in us at all." I really didn't want to admit that everything he said was true, but I couldn't argue with him in any way. We had taught them to be tough and self-sufficient, but at some point their personalities had changed. They had become entitled, had no empathy, and wanted more and more. There is no way to fully describe how bad I was feeling. The pain and suffering were so bad that they couldn't be measured. I felt sorry deep down in my heart for the family we used to be. In the meantime, I had come to the conclusion that our sons had left us, and that there was little chance that they would ever return to the way of life they had before they left us. Things started to go wrong as soon as Charles and Henry brought up the idea of selling the mansion. At first, people talked about the notion in a relaxed way, as if it were just a simple suggestion. Charles told his parents, "Mother, Father, you should seriously think about moving to a more comfortable place," when they came to visit. At first, I tried to ignore the comment. This house is in terrible condition, but the house was definitely old. Even if it was constructed out of love and not money, we still had a place to call home. I didn't want to lose the memories that were inside that thing. I invested all of my time and energy into creating this house with Ernest, and finishing it was my top priority. We had raised our kids there and developed our lives together as a spouse there as well. We weren't fully happy with it, but it was still ours. We came to a decision about the subject. That is the end of the story. Charles, on the other hand, was not the type of person who easily admitted he had failed or quickly gave up. Before this, he and Jasmine had thought of relocating us to a place that was specifically designed to meet the requirements of older people. They said it would be good for us because we would own all we needed and wouldn't have to worry about taking care of the house in any manner. We thought it was given to us in a way that was so magnificent that we couldn't resist it, and it made us feel like it was for our own good. No matter what, I knew what the situation really was. I knew that this wasn't going to help us in any way. It was going to help them instead. They really wanted to make that house their own place to live. At that very moment, they really needed money. They planned to leave everything they owned behind and get on with their lives. While they were doing that, they would leave the rest of us behind since they no longer felt responsible for taking care of us. Before I left my job, I can't deny that I fought hard to save it. I battled to keep our home safe and to keep the way our life together looked. Ernest made it quite clear that he didn't want to go anywhere else at that moment. He was 70 years old, but he still went to the store and worked every day. He did this every day because coming to work was part of his routine. He didn't appear to care at all about the idea of quitting. If he had never seen that thing or done that thing before, he wouldn't be able to picture what it would be like. The floor would crack every time someone walked on it. The roof of the house would leak every time it rained, and the building was also in bad shape. None of these exact aspects caught his attention at all. He felt good about the idea that this was where we lived. I told him, "There is nothing for you to be worried about, Margot. I promise that we will sort out this issue." He replied, "Making things work has always been something that we have been successful at." I could see the sadness in his eyes, though. I could see he was sad when he was there to see how our sons treated us. They acted like our lives were worthless and that we were like trash that needed to be thrown away. He was very sure of himself and proud when it came to things like these. There is no doubt about this. Still, I knew that seeing how little they cared about the things that really mattered, the things we had made together, the love that had kept us going through the hardest times, broke him. After the event happened, the pressure kept rising at an even faster rate. Every time the subject of selling the house came up in conversation, Charles and Henry made it seem like they were giving an ultimatum. They would say things like, "It's just a house, Mom," or "You and Dad don't need all this space." They would talk about how much easier it would be for us to live somewhere with more amenities, as if that was the only thing that mattered. That exact situation did not happen at that time. When this issue was being looked at, the most important factors were not how easy it would be to get to, where the home was, or how much money it would save. It was largely about memories that people had of things that had happened in the past. It was based on the life that Ernest and I had slowly constructed together over a given amount of time. I didn't want to do nothing to get out of that situation. I really wanted to leave it behind. Right now, the right answer to this is no. One day as Ernest was working, he got into an accident that changed his life forever. He was used to going out early in the morning, and he had done so that morning as well. Every day I would go up to him, kiss him on the cheek and say goodbye. I would also promise him that I would come back to see him soon after I left. When I got the call, I was in the kitchen making his favorite lunch, a mix of mashed potatoes and meatloaf. I will always remember the phone call I got. "Mrs. Blank, the director would like to have a meeting with you," said a voice I didn't know. "Hayes, your husband, was in a terribly bad accident." Even though I didn't comprehend what they were saying, they were very clear that I needed to get to the hospital very away. Ernest was always ready for anything that might happen, and he never let his guard down. He knew the building inside and out, and he knew every item in it. What could have happened to cause this situation to be the way it is now? I put on my coat and left the home as fast as I could. I didn't waste a second. My heart was thumping so fast that it hurt. I've been looking forward to this moment for a long time, and now it's here. But the truth was that the worst things were still to come, and I didn't know this. Charles and Henry were already at the hospital when I got there. When I got into the car, I was sleepy, but I can't be sure if that's really the case. I don't remember ever getting inside the car. I have been told that Ernest has third-degree burns all over his body and that his mental function has been greatly affected. They said he was struggling for his life and that his health was quite bad. I saw that my kids were acting cold and emotionless, which didn't seem right given how serious the situation was. This observation made me feel bad. It gave me the creeps. From where he was sitting, Charles could see the parking lot that was next to him. He made a conscious effort to control his behavior so that he could seem solemn and serious when he was talking to the doctors about a certain topic. They never showed any signs of being nervous at all. They didn't look like the kids of a man who was about to die. They seemed to be waiting with a lot of patience, sure that something would happen at any moment. But what would the real essence of this be like? I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. After that, I had no idea where I was or what I was doing for the next few days. I went to the hospital to see Ernest as often as I could. I prayed and hoped for a miracle to happen during that time. There was no proof that the opposing side was acting differently. Ernest was still connected to a number of different medical devices, and he had not yet come out of his coma. He was fighting back because he needed to in order to stay alive. Even though the doctors had told me this may happen, I didn't want to believe or accept the truth that the odds of a good outcome weren't in my favor. I couldn't believe that I would lose my spouse, my best friend, and the love of my life. Even though the hours turned into days and time passed, I slowly came to the conclusion that this situation was more than just a normal mistake. What Charles and Henry did was not at all like what they usually do. The way these people acted had nothing to do with how teens who had just lost their father acted. They were careful and frugal, and their major concern, which was money, was too much. I accidentally heard what Ernest and the physicians were talking about while they were talking about his insurance policy while I was listening in on their chat. This policy also covers workers' compensation, in addition to what would happen if Ernest dies. It looked like they had accepted that the destiny had already made the choice about Ernest's demise. There was nothing else they could do but wait for the moment that would happen. At that same moment I came to that conclusion. This was not a coincidence. It was done on purpose with careful thinking and planning. That situation could not have happened. This is the only conclusion that makes sense, which suggests that someone must have done this on purpose. Who else would be involved in that case? If I may be so brave to ask, what is the goal or purpose? I had to find out what my sons were keeping from me. I was sure of only one thing. I didn't know what the answers were. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and that made me feel incredibly horrible. I held Ernest's hand even closer while I lay in the hospital bed. At that point, I started to rethink what I had always thought was true without question. Henry and Charles acted like the hospital room was just another chance to do business, which was really bizarre. Their main concern was their father's money problems. The guy himself was not very important to them. I never noticed anything in their eyes that made me feel panic or worry. I began to question if this had been planned and arranged in before. Did you think about all the little things? Is there any chance, no matter how small, that they helped plan this calamity in some way? I couldn't get away from the process of coming to terms with the truth, even though the amount of material I had in front of me kept growing, which made me feel sick to my stomach. It is quite rude to sit around talking about insurance and plans as if Ernest didn't exist and was just a bunch of numbers written down on a piece of paper. Their behavior shows that they don't feel anything and aren't interested in anything at all, even though they should be mourning the death of their father. What could be the reason for how they acted? After that, I had no idea where I was or what I was doing for the next few days. While standing next to Ernest, I kept asking, begging, and pleading with him to get over it. The doctors kept telling me the same thing. There was no hope for the illnesses. He had a lot of injuries, including serious burns on most of his body and a lot of damage to his brain. This is the information that was given to the public. The chance that he would never come out of the coma he is in right now. I thought it was a hindrance to my progress because I couldn't understand it at all. The truth is that situations like these did happen, but I wasn't ready to admit or confess that they happened. Ernest was a warrior who never gave up, no matter how hard things got. He was always willing to fight through anything. At least as far as anyone can tell. He had never done anything like this before. The individual being talked about is the one who is most likely to win in this situation. As time went on, I started to notice that there were a lot of strange things going on with the matter at hand. I became more and more aware of this as time went on. The things that Charles and Henry did were very different from the things they usually do together. It seems that the only thing that produced the dread was the situation that I could see was happening. But after spending more time with them, I started to see that their situation was more nuanced than just being unhappy. They were also waiting patiently, keeping their hopes up that something would come along. They were just waiting for Ernest to die, which they were sure would happen. The reason that was found to be completely illogical was the reason that was offered to back it up. They were quite familiar with the procedures they followed in many situations, such as making phone calls, dealing with problems, talking to doctors, and getting around the hospital. They have planned for this moment in time so well that it appears like they had left no stone unturned. What significance did it have given the circumstances? I am sure that I was the only person who was worried that my spouse might be killed. I couldn't figure out what had happened when Ernest got into a situation that had been really dangerous until the third day had passed. I ran into Charles and Henry just as they were talking to each other. I could hear their voices clearly enough to tell that they were talking to each other. Charles added, "As soon as he leaves, we can go back to living our lives as usual." He went on to say, "The paperwork for the insurance is already done and ready for me to use." He went on to say, "We need to get rid of all our stuff and sell the house so we can start a new chapter in our lives." Henry's comments sent chills down my spine, even though his voice sounded much nicer than it had in the past. He told the people who were covering the news, "We are going to be free of debt, and we will no longer have to wait. We need to make sure that Mother doesn't suspect anything. We don't want her to be an obstacle in any way. We'll take care of everything from here on out. She won't know anything that just happened to her." I thought my kids were good boys, but now I know they're actually bad, dishonest, and greedy people who will do anything for money. It suddenly hit me that the accident that happened to Ernest was not a coincidence or the result of chance. It was the accident that happened to Ernest. It was something that had been meticulously planned and thought out before it happened. Their desire to keep going and their resolve to move forward are both clear evidence that they have made excellent plans for the future. The fact that they were seeking for more than just Ernest should be enough to show that their purpose was to take all of the stuff he had. Place of residence. Everything was done with the goal of making money, including saving money and getting life insurance. I was sure I didn't want to spend any more time in that hospital room. I had a nagging feeling that something was wrong, and the fresh air made me think I was about to pass out. Every time I looked at Charles and Henry, my terror grew even stronger. I had to leave that place since they had decided they didn't want to be around me. I left the hospital that same night since the event was too upsetting for me to stay there any longer. I drove back to our house with my hands shaking on the wheel. I had been deeply absorbed in the subjects I had accidentally come across while discreetly eavesdropping on other people's talks. At that time, I fully understood how important it was to act right now. I strongly believed that they were acting unethically, which made me feel that I had no choice but to step in and do something. But I wasn't sure where to start. I searched through everything Ernest had left behind when he left early the next morning. I started working at the office he set up in his home. Over the course of several years, he had spent a lot of time looking over papers, getting his finances in order, and making sure that everything was working as it should in this area. He used to be quite detail-oriented and didn't trust anything that seemed strange. While I was going through the things on his desk, I saw something that made me feel scared. That policy wasn't just any old policy. It was one that protected the policyholder's family in the case of their death. At that time, the insurance only covered up to $5,000. This amount, on the other hand, was raised to $50,000 6 months before the current time. What do you believe might have driven Ernest to do the job he did? Could you explain why he hasn't said a thing to me about this? I started putting together the different parts. Ernest knew about a certain event before it happened. Even though he had no idea what was going on, he knew something was wrong. He had updated his will, insurance, and any other necessary documentation to avoid any problems that could arise if something unexpected happened. He didn't tell me anything about this. Can you explain me why that is? There are several conceivable reasons why he would not want to tell me this. What are some of the other things he could do? I heard a faint buzzing sound while I was sitting there looking over the policy. It was my phone. It had a new message from the same unknown number that had sent the other texts. The alert told me to look into the bank account and find out who moved the money. I couldn't do anything to get myself to move at all. Where did they get the information they gathered in the first place? What did they know about the bank, and where did they get that information? I made finding out the truth my top priority since I was absolutely sure it was the most important thing. I went to the bank the next day. As I got closer to Mrs. Thompson, the bank manager, I started to sweat coldly on my hands, and I could feel my terror start to take over. I trusted her completely and gave her everything I had because I had known her for a long time. I don't have as much faith in the people I know as I used to. This is true because I am on the other side of the equation. 6 months ago, I asked to see the statements that are currently on file for the account. I noticed that Mrs. Thompson's eyes looked weird when she was supposed to give me the documents. Even though she seemed like a great person, this happened. I feel terrible about what happened with Margot, she replied softly. Ernest was a good person, and when he heard that she had died, he was heartbroken. I read the comments and tried to keep a neutral look on my face, even as I shook my head in agreement. We all want him. He's a really special person, I said. As I kept reading down the page, my heart sank deeper and deeper into my chest. A lot of money was taken out of the account during the 3 months leading up to that date. To be more specific, people took out a total of $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, and $4,000 in March. Money that I didn't know about and money that I hadn't agreed to provide. I asked Mrs. Thompson if she had any papers about people who had already taken money out. She stopped after quickly looking over the paperwork and then took out a group of invoices from the stack. Ernest seemed to have left the autographs, but there was something about them that made it feel like something was wrong. Ernest couldn't write this way since his handwriting was shaky and didn't let him. As soon as I answered the question, my voice started to shake. I asked the other people on the bus, did anyone else come with Ernest when he got there? Before answering anything that Mrs. Thompson said, she thought about it and studied it a lot. Ernest made sure to emphasize that he needed help with the paperwork since he couldn't read the small print without his spectacles. He also made sure to bring up the fact that Charles had been with him on a number of occasions. This feeling is quite similar to the one a person feels right before they get hit by lightning. Charles was able to withdraw money out of our account without me knowing because he had been there before. I have always been sure that he wants to do what's best for us, and I have never had any questions about his motives. I have also never been afraid to show my support for his morals. On the other hand, I have now reached a point in time when I can fully understand every part of the issue at hand. He was using the fact that his father's health was getting worse to look into our finances and to try to obtain as much as he could before the time ran out. At that moment, I came to the conclusion that I shouldn't believe whatever he said. I learned that none of those people could be trusted in any way. That night, when I was in the kitchen, I got another message from the unknown number. This had happened many times before. There are people on their way to this location to save you and take you away from here, Margot. There will definitely be people who try to convince you that you are going crazy. These people will come after you. Stop them from doing anything about those things. No matter what it is or who it is from, you shouldn't take it from any of them. The dinner has nothing to do with the situation. Can't be the booze. No matter what they are planning now, they are much worse than anything you could think of. Because of what was said, I felt a strong chill go down my spine. I had no idea who this person was, but they had a lot of information. They knew Henry and Charles. They were folks the community knew. When it comes to money, they know everything there is to know about the situation. They comprehended every single element of the problem completely and thoroughly. At this point, I finally understood that they were the only ones who could help me in this awful circumstance. Over the next few days, I kept a careful record of all the things I had done. The standards that Charles and Henry were suggesting were much stricter than any they had mentioned before. They were pushing me to sell my house and move to an area that was made just for older people. While I was trying to have a better idea of the big picture of their plan, I found that the things they were saying were too polished and rehearsed. The house was simply one of the many things they wanted. Their goal was to get absolute control over everything. They were full of excitement and couldn't wait for the time when I would leave the building. I was going to stay out of sight, and I wanted to do that because that's what they wanted me to do. Later that same night I got another email, and it was even later. Head to the police station. If you could let me see the paper that provides information about the accident that hurt Ernest, I would be extremely thankful. It is quite important for you to know that some things will not add up. That same moment in time can be seen as the start of the end. I had no choice but to admit the truth of the situation, since that's what they were. I knew I had to learn everything there was to know about the problem before it was too late. I would be quite interested in asking for the information if I got a message that said, "Go to the police station." On the same day, I asked for documents on the accident that included Ernest. I know that there are certain contradictions that I should be aware of, and for the first time I feel like I have a real chance to come up with solutions. Since I got rid of the weight that had been on my shoulders, I feel like I have a lighter load to carry. After that, I felt this lightness for a brief time. I thought that the person sending the texts knew something I didn't, but I had no idea who that person was. If this were to happen, it would be my job to know that its identification would be the reason. That morning I didn't have a lot of time, so I was in a hurry to get ready. Every second was very crucial, and there was no time to waste or utilize for fun. It was really important to use every second as well as possible. I was so miserable that I couldn't stand the thought of spending another second in that location. I thought there was nothing else I could do but take action and do whatever it took to learn more about what had happened to Ernest, us, and our family. I left the flat, making sure that my purse was tightly held in my hand. As I walked to the police station in my area, my heart started to race. As soon as I got close to the building, I was hit with sensations that the Spring Creek district is sure to bring to the front of my mind. There were no strangers in the small town because everyone knew each other. Everyone knew everyone else. For most of my life I have lived here. I knew Ernest very well, and so did my neighbors. I would wave to them every morning, as well as to my friends, with whom I had lived my whole life. Anyone thought that this area would be a safe haven for anyone who needed it. I lived in a community where people trusted each other and looked out for each other, even though I soon realized that I didn't know who I could rely on for a long time. Everything I thought I knew was completely and thoroughly destroyed. Sergeant O'Connell met me as soon as I walked inside the police station. He had known Ernest for a long time and was familiar with him. They have worked together on a lot of different projects in the past, and all of them have been good for the people who live in the town. Ernest had always thought highly of himself, and I had never been afraid to put my full trust in him. With that in mind, I wasn't sure how reliable the other people were on that day. Since the things that have happened in the last few days, I can't shake the feeling that someone is following me from behind, and I've been on edge ever since. I had no way to get away from how I felt at all. The manner Sergeant O'Connell spoke at first showed that he was nervous. even though he tried to hide it in his rehearsed tone. He said, "Margot." That is what he stated exactly. That is exactly what he said. "I'm sorry to hear about the bad things that have transpired in your life. We have all been thinking about you. What can I do for you today? I can't find the exact thing you're looking for." I knew my hands were shaking, but I was able to stay calm and say, "I need to see the report on Ernest's accident. Now that I know there are problems with the report, it's my job to look into it and find out what really happened. I want to know the truth about what happened." He frowned and looked at me for a long time, which made it seem like he was confused. It was Sergeant O'Connell who gave me that look, not the other way around. He asked if any of the facts stated there were not in agreement with each other. "I don't understand what happened." The accident report was finished after the event had already happened. The authorities have been told about this event. It was really easy to understand everything. After an accident in the store, Ernest was sent to the hospital. Because of the accident, he got quite badly burned. A few days after he was taken to the hospital, the physicians figured out that the injuries he had gotten at work were the direct cause of his illness. In the end, these injuries killed him. While I was talking, I was trying to make sure that the discomfort I was feeling, which was getting worse and showing up in my voice, wouldn't be noticed by anyone else. I emphasized how important the statements "I need to see it," "I need to know all the details," and "I agree with everything" are. He lifted his head up and down for a brief time before going on to the filing cabinet. In a flat voice with a hint of worry, he said, "I will get the report for you." After he took the report out, he gave me the folder, but he kept staring at me as if he couldn't comprehend why I had taken such a firm stance. I looked inside the folder once I had loosened the clasp with my shaking fingers. The investigation's results show that Ernest had serious brain damage in addition to severe burns. These injuries were the result of an explosion that was reported to have happened in his place of business. The details I had just learned were in line with everything I had been told before that moment. But there was something about that place that made it seem like not everything was right. Before that, I had gone to the grocery store. Ernest had always been quite careful and precise when it comes to keeping his things safe. If he had been there, that wouldn't have occurred. This level of not paying attention is so bad that it is absolutely out of character for him. I couldn't understand it. I came across something interesting when I was reading, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. It is very important to note that the report did not say what chemical caused the explosion. This is very important information. This is even though the report talked about burns that happened because of an explosion with a chemical. Also, the fact that the equipment didn't work right was never brought up in conversation. If anything catches fire on its own, what are some probable reasons why this might have happened, especially if there isn't an evident reason for it? After that, I was able to see the part of the occurrence that would turn out to be the most disturbing part of the whole thing. None of the government inquiries arrived at any conclusions that provided an explanation for the tragedy. There wasn't an investigation to find out if any crimes had been committed. There were also questions that needed solutions, but no one involved doubted any of these queries. They had pretty much decided that an accident had happened. Why wasn't there an investigation? I said in a voice so low that it was almost lost in the sound of a whisper. I looked up at Sergeant O'Connell, who was looking back at me. I was having trouble controlling my thoughts. I told him I was sorry, but I couldn't give him any information on the issue. Ernest answered without showing the slightest hint of doubt or hesitation. This was true even if the question that had been asked of him had plainly caught him off guard. There is no proof that anyone has done anything illegal. No one had any doubts about Ernest's personality. It looked like nothing more than a dreadful stroke of bad luck. Someone who is committed, works hard, and is careful. It was really hard for me to trust what I was reading since it was very hard for me to understand. I couldn't understand the facts that had been given to me. To put it simply, it wasn't just a normal accident. That's exactly what happened. That can't be true. Someone. I want to thank you, I said as I slowly got to my feet. When I leave, I want to take this with me. I didn't know the complete plan when I was at the station. It involved the planned and purposeful murder of Ernest. kidnapped Ernest and went to tremendous lengths to make it look like it never happened. This crime hurt Ernest. In that case, who else? Before everything happened, I had no idea how big this scheme was. It entailed the planned murder of Ernest. He didn't try to stop me from leaving. Instead, he gave me an appreciative nod, which is different from what Sergeant O'Connell did. Because my worries were not unfounded, I went through a lot of emotional pain and suffering. Even though he knew what was going on, he chose not to say anything about it. What was that one thing? This is because the oxygen atom in the hydroxyl group has a lower electronegativity than the oxygen atom in the carboxylic acid group. The strange phrases that Charles and Henry had said when they were in the hospital kept coming to mind. I couldn't quit thinking about them. Another thing that made it hard for me to get over was that their demeanor made it seem like they were expecting something to happen. They seemed to be in complete control of the situation, showing an incredible amount of calmness and focus on the details of the financial concerns that were being talked about. They acted in a way that showed they fully understood what was about to happen. I thought about how Charles talked about the insurance plans and how badly he wanted to see the problem solved. They had planned for Ernest's death from the start, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was true. The phone ringing again caught my attention while I was seated there. I was the one who was supposed to get another way to talk to others. Look around the store. You should open every drawer on Ernest's desk, starting with the top one and working your way down. You should also look at other things. I didn't have time to spare, not even a second. I quickly grabbed my keys and went to the store. When I got there, I found out that the door was locked, which it always is. On the other hand, it made it seem like things were different than they used to be. The area was eerily quiet. There was an uncomfortable quiet in the air. I found out that the door had not been fully closed when I went to the back. It was only slightly open. As soon as I stepped inside, I was hit by the smell of metal and oil, something I was all too acquainted with. This business belonged to Ernest. He fulfilled the job he had promised to see through for his whole time there. It involved fixing bicycles and doing manual labor with his hands. It seemed like it was still there since he was there, but there was another thing hiding in the shadows no matter what. I went to the desk he used all the time. He had been doing things like arranging the books, going through the paperwork, and keeping records of everything at that very desk. I had a good idea of the area I wanted to look into. After taking out the drawer from the compartment, I could see exactly what I had been looking for. It was a small metal box that held all of the important papers that Ernest had gathered. When I got there, things were very different from what I had thought they would be. I had never seen those papers until this point in time. They were Ernest's handwritten notes, medical records, and insurance policies. My body was shaking as I went through the process of looking at the things. One note really shocked me. He wrote a short note a few days before he died. I have come to the conclusion that something is wrong here. Charles has been acting strangely, and Henry has been asking strange questions. They are looking for an insurance plan that meets their specific needs. What these people desire is too much for me to be able to provide them. I need to be very careful about what I do because, like a wave, the feeling of losing consciousness hit me hard. Ernest could retrieve the information at any time because it was easy for him to get to. He had been doing everything he could to keep me safe ever since he first felt something strange. He had been there, doing everything he could think of to keep us safe in every way. The last few letters I read confirmed my biggest fears and worries. Ernest thought that Henry and Charles had broken the trust he had in them. Ernest knew that the caution flags were there, but he didn't know how to stop the betrayal from happening. He had done all he could think of to get ready for the worst possible outcome, but now there was nothing he could do to stop it from happening. I was standing there in the quiet of the business, clutching the papers that would change everything. While I was in that scenario, I was puzzled and didn't know what to do. This was not just a money issue, it was also a murder case. The content filters stopped the text from being made. I had to do something right away because I wasn't going to let them get away with the horrible things they had done. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending us super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.